There is a kind of protection every deeply sensitive person eventually needs to develop. Not because the world is filled with people who want to harm them, but because constantly absorbing the emotional atmosphere around you can quietly become one of the most exhausting patterns in your life. You walk into a room and immediately notice the tension. You talk to someone and somehow sense that their smile doesn't match their energy. Someone compliments you, but something about the interaction leaves you uncomfortable. Someone becomes distant after you achieve something. Someone suddenly starts making subtle comments whenever your life begins improving. And, because you're naturally observant, you may begin asking yourself, did I do something wrong? But what if the real lesson isn't learning how to identify every jealous person? What if the real lesson is learning how to stop allowing someone else's jealousy to become your emotional responsibility? Because that is where the lifetime shield begins. And surprisingly, the shield isn't isolation. It isn't becoming suspicious of everyone. It isn't hiding your achievements. It isn't making yourself smaller so other people never feel threatened. The shield is emotional separation. Understanding that another person's feelings belong to them. Someone can envy you without you needing to fix their insecurity. Someone can misunderstand you without you needing to prove your intentions. Someone can become uncomfortable with your growth without you needing to shrink your life. That distinction sounds simple, but for an empath, it can completely change everything. Because when you're highly attuned to other people's emotions, you may unconsciously begin managing feelings that were never yours to manage. Someone is jealous, and you become guilty. Someone is insecure, and you start reassuring them. Someone feels threatened, and you reduce yourself. Someone becomes cold after your success, and you start wondering whether you should have stayed quiet. And slowly, you learn to associate your own happiness with someone else's discomfort. That's dangerous, because eventually you stop asking, "What do I want?" and start asking, "How will everyone else feel about what I want?" That is exactly where your protection needs to begin. The first part of your shield is learning not to over-explain your happiness. You don't need to justify every achievement. You don't need to explain why you're excited. You don't need to apologize for improving your life. You don't need to convince someone that your success doesn't diminish theirs. A healthy person can celebrate your progress without needing you to make yourself smaller. But when someone consistently responds to your happiness with subtle criticism, comparison, dismissiveness, or strange emotional withdrawal, you don't necessarily need confrontation. Sometimes, you simply stop giving them unrestricted access to your inner world. And this leads to the second layer of the shield: discernment without paranoia. Not everyone who acts differently around your success is jealous. People have bad days. People struggle privately. People can be emotionally overwhelmed. So the goal isn't to label every uncomfortable interaction as envy. The goal is to notice patterns. One strange comment means very little, but repeated behavior tells you more. Does this person consistently minimize your achievements? Do they become supportive only when you're struggling? Do they turn your good news into competition? Do they subtly discourage opportunities that could help you grow? Do they seem more comfortable with the version of you that needs them than the version of you that no longer does? Those patterns are worth noticing. Not because you're supposed to become afraid, because you're supposed to become discerning. And discernment changes the way you respond. You don't need to confront every person you suspect. You don't need to expose them. You don't need to announce that you've discovered their jealousy. You simply adjust access. Less personal information, fewer explanations, more privacy, more observation. And that brings us to something even deeper. Your greatest shield may be refusing to absorb emotional reactions that don't belong to you. Someone looks disappointed because you said no. You don't automatically feel guilty. Someone becomes distant because you succeeded. You don't automatically chase them. Someone makes a sarcastic comment about your progress. You don't spend the entire night wondering whether you should have said less. You can notice their reaction without carrying it. You can care about someone without becoming responsible for their emotional regulation. And once you learn that, jealousy loses much of its power over you. Because the goal isn't to prevent people from feeling envy. You can't control that. The goal is to prevent their envy from becoming a reason you abandon yourself. And there is one final layer to this shield that we'll explore in part 2. Because protecting yourself from jealous energy isn't ultimately about learning how to identify dangerous people. It's about becoming so internally secure that someone else's inability to celebrate you no longer changes the way you see yourself. That is when protection becomes permanent. That is when you can walk into a room, feel the atmosphere, notice what is happening, and still remain completely yourself. And once you reach that level, something changes. You stop asking, "Why doesn't everyone support me?" and start understanding. Not everyone has the capacity to celebrate what they haven't yet learned to create within themselves. And that realization is where the real shield begins. And this is where the lifetime shield becomes something much deeper than simply protecting yourself from jealous people. Because eventually, you realize that you cannot control who envies you. You cannot control who compares themselves to you. You cannot control who feels uncomfortable when you grow. And you certainly cannot control what someone privately feels when your life begins moving in a direction they wish their own life were moving. But you can control one thing: how much authority their feelings have over your behavior. That is where genuine emotional protection begins. The third layer of your shield is learning to stop shrinking before anyone even asks you to. This happens more often than people realize. You achieve something, but you hesitate to talk about it. You receive an opportunity, but you immediately think about who might feel uncomfortable. You become happier, but part of you feels guilty because someone close to you isn't doing well. You start changing your life, but you unconsciously keep one foot in the past so other people don't feel left behind. And eventually, you aren't simply living your own life. You're managing an invisible audience. You're constantly asking, will this make someone jealous? Will they think I'm showing off? Will they become distant? Will they judge me? But think about what that means. Someone else's possible reaction has become powerful enough to influence decisions that belong entirely to you. That's not protection. That's emotional captivity. A healthy shield doesn't make you hide your light. It teaches you that someone else's inability to handle your light is not a reason to turn it off. You can remain humble without becoming invisible. You can celebrate yourself without humiliating anyone else. You can succeed without believing you've done something wrong. And you can continue growing even when not everyone celebrates the person you're becoming. The fourth layer is selective vulnerability. Not everyone deserves access to your deepest plans. Not everyone needs to know what you're building before it exists. Not everyone needs to know your fears, your weaknesses, your financial goals, your relationship struggles, or the next direction your life is taking. This doesn't mean becoming secretive or distrustful. It means understanding that access should be earned through consistency. Some people genuinely celebrate you. Some people support you when you're struggling and when you're succeeding. Some people can hear your good news without turning it into a comparison. Those people are safe to bring closer. But if someone repeatedly demonstrates that your vulnerability becomes ammunition, your success becomes competition, or your happiness becomes an opportunity for criticism, you don't have to keep giving them the same level of access. You can become private without becoming cold, and privacy can be incredibly peaceful. You don't have to announce every transformation. You don't have to explain every goal. You don't have to make everyone part of every chapter. Sometimes, the healthiest thing you can do is quietly build. And here's where the deepest protection begins. You stop interpreting jealousy as a verdict on your worth. Someone's jealousy doesn't mean you're superior, but it also doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. Their reaction may simply reveal something happening inside them. Perhaps they are comparing. Perhaps they are insecure. Perhaps your progress reminds them of something they wish they had done. Perhaps they are struggling with their own life. Whatever the reason, you don't need to make their internal experience your identity. And this distinction is incredibly important, because if you interpret jealousy as proof that you're better than someone, you remain psychologically connected to them. You're still measuring yourself against them. But if you interpret it as information about the relationship rather than a measurement of your worth, you become free. You can think, I don't need to compete with you. I don't need to prove I'm ahead. I don't need you to be behind for me to move forward. That is emotional maturity. The fifth layer is refusing to participate in comparison. Jealous energy becomes much more powerful when you enter the competition. Someone buys something. You feel you need something better. Someone succeeds. You feel pressure to prove you're succeeding more. Someone receives attention. You feel invisible. Someone criticizes you. You feel compelled to demonstrate your value. But the moment you stop competing, the entire system begins losing its fuel. Your life isn't a scoreboard. Someone else's success doesn't reduce yours. Someone else's beauty doesn't remove yours. Someone else's relationship doesn't invalidate yours. Someone else's career doesn't determine your potential. And someone else's jealousy doesn't define your character. You can simply continue becoming who you want to become. And there is one final piece. The strongest empath eventually learns that sensitivity itself isn't the problem. The problem is having sensitivity without boundaries. Your ability to notice emotions can be a gift. Your intuition can help you recognize patterns. Your empathy can make you deeply compassionate, but those qualities become exhausting when you absorb everything around you as though it belongs to you. So when you enter a room and feel tension, you can notice it without owning it. When someone becomes cold, you can observe it without immediately blaming yourself. When someone reacts strangely to your success, you can acknowledge it without shrinking. And when someone projects insecurity onto you, you can let it remain where it belongs, with them. That is the lifetime shield. Not avoiding jealous people, not exposing them, not fighting them, not becoming emotionally numb, but developing enough inner stability to say, I can see what is happening without becoming what is happening. And once you understand that, something beautiful begins to happen. You become harder to manipulate through guilt, harder to control through comparison, harder to silence through disapproval, and much less likely to abandon your own happiness simply because someone else cannot celebrate it. You stop hiding your progress. You stop apologizing for becoming healthier. You stop explaining why you're moving forward. You stop asking permission to evolve. And you finally understand something that can protect you for the rest of your life. You are not responsible for making yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. You can be kind. You can be humble. You can be compassionate. You can wish them well. And still, keep moving. Because your light was never an attack on anyone. Your healing was never an insult. Your success was never a declaration of superiority. Your happiness was never something you needed to apologize for. And if someone feels threatened simply because you're becoming more secure, more peaceful, more confident, and more yourself, you don't have to fight their reaction. You simply refuse to carry it. And that is when your sensitivity becomes strength. Because you can walk through the world with an open heart without leaving your boundaries at the door. You can feel deeply without absorbing everything. You can love people without surrendering your identity. You can recognize jealousy without becoming consumed by it. And you can continue shining without constantly checking who is uncomfortable with the light. Because the ultimate shield isn't around you, it's within you. And once it's there, no jealous person has to change for you to remain at peace. You don't need everyone to celebrate you. You only need to stop abandoning yourself when they don't. And maybe that's the truth you needed to hear most. You were never meant to spend your life trying to figure out who is jealous of you. You were never meant to examine every facial expression, every silence, every strange comment, wondering whether someone secretly resents your happiness. Because if you spend your entire life monitoring other people's energy, you eventually stop experiencing your own. You start watching the room instead of living in it. You start protecting your happiness instead of enjoying it. You start hiding your dreams before anyone has even had the opportunity to criticize them. And slowly, the very sensitivity that once made you deeply compassionate becomes the reason you keep yourself small. But you don't have to live that way. You can notice without absorbing. You can understand without carrying. You can empathize without taking responsibility for another person's insecurity. And most importantly, you can continue becoming yourself without waiting for everyone around you to become comfortable with it. There may always be someone who doesn't understand your growth, someone who compares, someone who quietly resents the things you're building, someone who preferred you when you were less confident, someone who felt safer when you questioned yourself. But their preference does not have to become your prison. Let them feel whatever they feel. You don't have to punish them for it. You don't have to expose them. You don't have to prove anything. You simply keep walking. Because the most powerful response to jealousy isn't arrogance, it's peace. You don't need to announce that you're winning. You don't need to make someone else feel smaller. You don't need to turn your success into a weapon. You simply live. You grow, you heal, you build, you love, and you refuse to apologize for becoming the person you were always capable of becoming. One day, you'll notice something has changed. Someone can withdraw their approval, and you remain steady. Someone can criticize you, and you don't immediately question yourself. Someone can fail to celebrate you, and you still celebrate your own progress. Someone can misunderstand you, and you no longer feel desperate to correct their entire perception of you. That's when you know the shield is working, not because you stopped feeling, but because you stopped letting everything you feel control you. Your heart is still open. Your empathy is still there. Your sensitivity is still there. But now, there is something beside them, discernment. And discernment tells you, this emotion isn't mine. This insecurity belongs to them. I don't need to fix this. I don't need to shrink. I don't need to compete. I can simply continue. And that is freedom. So, protect your peace. Protect your dreams. Protect the parts of your life that are still becoming. Be generous with your kindness, but selective with your access. Be compassionate, but don't become responsible for everyone else's emotional comfort. And never confuse being humble with hiding. You are allowed to be proud of how far you've come. You are allowed to enjoy your life. You are allowed to become more confident. You are allowed to succeed. You are allowed to shine. And if someone becomes uncomfortable because you finally stopped dimming yourself, remember, their discomfort is not your command. You don't have to turn your light down. You don't have to step backward. You don't have to return to the version of yourself that made everyone else comfortable. Keep growing. Keep becoming. Keep your heart soft. Keep your boundaries strong, and walk forward, knowing that the safest place you can ever build isn't a world where nobody envies you. It's a world inside yourself where someone else's jealousy can no longer make you question your own worth. Because once you reach that place, you can finally shine without fear. And you can finally understand, your light was never the problem. You were simply never meant to carry the darkness someone else refused to heal.